Hey, it's Elizabeth Cronus McLaughlin. It's Resistance Live for the 4th of October, 2019. Okay, I'm going to sit here for a minute and let all of you guys log in because once again, I have kind of like a massive list of stuff. The last 24 hours, I think everybody can understand, have been like among the most, I would call it dramatic, tragic, criminal that we've seen in the history of this country. And, you know, we've got breaking news every 5 minutes right now. I have some serious concerns this morning that I want to get to once we've got everybody online, just about where we stand right now from the standpoint of pushback. But we've had over the last 24 hours, you know, I don't even want to kind of like estimate it. I want to say like, you know, a dozen, maybe 15 breaking news stories that under any other presidency would have eliminated this president for the rest of all time. And you know, the news here is that it really only is getting worse. So there's an awful lot to be concerned about. I'm seeing that many of you are logging in right now. So we're going to get started. And I want to start with the biggest breaking news from last night. So as you all know, Kurt Volker, the former special envoy to Ukraine, testified yesterday on the Hill for 9.5 hours. It was not a short deposition. He turned over a lot of information, and one of the things that he conveyed was text messages that are actually quite recent. Many of them are from September. And late last night at about 11 o'clock East Coast time, Adam Schiff and his colleagues released a letter and a trove of those text messages concerning the arrangement with Ukraine to investigate the Bidens in exchange for aid, and the aid being withheld and what the president would require to release it. And I'm just going to say this. You know, Neil Katyal said the same thing this morning. George Conway said the same thing this morning. I said it last night. In the 15 years that I was involved in litigating some of the highest profile antitrust and securities fraud conspiracy cases in the country, you know, and we're talking cases where people sat in a room and agreed to conspiracies. I never saw evidence as damning as what is contained in those text messages. You know, in particular, the quid pro quo is obvious. The fact that the president was requiring it is obvious. It just doesn't get any more damning than that. Now, I want to say a couple of things about this in particular. There is one text message that says POTUS is going to, something I'm paraphrasing now, POTUS is going to need the deliverable. I think POTUS really wants the deliverable. That, by the way, is an indication that unless he got a guarantee that the Ukrainians were going to investigate the Bidens, he was not going to release the aid. On top of that, we learned last night that the Ukrainians, in conjunction with 2 U.S. diplomats, actually drafted a written document that they had planned to release outlining that Ukraine was investigating the Bidens for corruption. You know, I want to make something really clear to all of you, because I know that there are many of you out there at this point in time who feel like you can't be shocked any longer by what has happened in this country and where we are. Those text messages are shocking. And you know, I'll just add that one of the things that is very clear here is that Bill Taylor, who is one of the people who was on those text messages, very plainly said, I think it's crazy to withhold aid in exchange for political help. And one of the things that's very clear here is that Taylor himself was documenting the fact that they knew they were over the line. And, you know, I've seen efforts in the past, you know, notwithstanding the quid pro quo evidence being incredibly damning and rare, I have seen evidence in the past where, for instance, executives and companies knew that they were dancing close to the line of something and would document it in a way where they could then exonerate themselves or talk about it down the road. It's a classic cover your ass tactic for folks who know what they're doing. It's very clear that that's what Bill Taylor was up to. What is absolutely apparent from all of this, though, is that there was an agreement that the aid would be withheld until POTUS got what he wanted on the Bidens. And, you know, I have won cases on less evidence than this. I have taken down executives and depositions on less evidence than this, forced settlements on less evidence than this. There's really no way to describe the enormity of what broke in these text messages last night that does it justice. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing some of the most high-profile litigators in the country expressing their extreme outrage right now for what has happened. So, the president did this press spray on the White House lawn this morning. We're going to get to that in a second. But one of the things that I want to make clear here is that from the standpoint of the GOP, from the standpoint of how all in they went on this, the whistleblower's lying. Well, that's now false. There's no evidence that there was a quid pro quo. That's now false. By the way, it's not required. We're going to get to that in a minute as well. But that's now false. Pence goes all in on this yesterday. I mean, thank the gods from our side of the fence, right? And then this breaks. The fact that the president is acting like it's not illegal, and we spent all of the broadcast yesterday talking about this, but the fact that the president is acting like it's not illegal doesn't change that it's illegal. So in addition to all of that breaking news yesterday, we also learned late last night that the president had similar phone conversations with President Xi of China. And in fact, that the silence on the Hong Kong protests was the quid pro quo there for China starting their own investigation into the Bidens. I will remind you all, by the way, we are currently in an ongoing trade war with China as well. One of the ways that, the president might be able to lift tariffs is if he gets his criminal needs met. So there are suspicions of other kinds of quid pro quo being handled there as well. Now, there's a couple things I want to make clear about how this information is getting out. Okay, so part of it is the testimony that was given on the Hill yesterday and the evidence that went with that. Part of this continues to be unknown leakers. I'll tell you the China story about the quid pro quo in Hong Kong had two sources. One of the things that's very clear here is that perhaps two people have access to the records of the calls with foreign leaders that are being held on that secret server inside the White House. I'm going to remind you all of something else because, one of the things that I thought about late last night that I woke up thinking about this morning that I've already been talking about on Twitter today is that we have not yet seen the records on his conversations with Kim Jong-un. We have not yet seen the records on his conversations with MBS, and we have not yet seen the records of his conversations with Vladimir Putin. And my expectation about this is that given what appears to be a strategy on the part of the leakers of leaking ever increasingly more damning evidence, that by the time we get to the end of this, it's going to be really gross. And not just about the 2020 election, but about the 2016 election, about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, about all sorts of other things. The interesting thing to see right now is going to be how long the Republicans hold up. So I'm going to get to that in a minute, but let's talk through a couple of other questions that you all had. All right. I should mention one other bit of breaking news. We did find out yesterday that, actually, I think it was this morning, that Pence found out about the call between Trump and Zelensky from July 25th, the day after it happened. That in and of itself is significant because Pence did go all in yesterday on the idea of let's investigate corruption. This is now the party line. Yesterday, the party line was it's not a crime. Today, the party line is I have an absolute right to investigate corruption. No, you don't. You don't have an absolute right to kind of investigate your political rivals in exchange for U.S. taxpayer dollars. No, you don't. You don't have the right to force international entities to interfere in the 2020 election because you've got them over a barrel financially for aid. No, you don't. But Pence is all in on this now. So, from the standpoint of strategy here now on impeachment, we're in a really interesting position. All right. We had a question about the process of impeachment. Now, you all know, going all the way back to January, we've done a lot of broadcasts on this. There's now current ongoing debates about what happens in the event that certain dominoes fall. So I want to make something very clear to you. The House could file articles of impeachment on a very limited number of crimes today. Those crimes could relate to Ukraine. They could relate to China. They could be articles of impeachment for the president, for the vice president, for Pompeo, for Barr, for the acting DNI, for officials in the DOJ, for White House officials. There's any number of ways in which this could fall. There is no obligation to file everything all at once. And indeed, one of the things that was being discussed late last night on MSNBC was the strategic considerations that are being vetted right now inside the House concerning whether to go all in, like everything under the sun, throw the kitchen sink at the wall, see what sticks, mixing my metaphors, or to just do a limited universe of articles of impeachment on this particular set of circumstances with regard to Ukraine. The reason why I'm raising this as an issue is because there was a very interesting question asked this morning on the question feed. What happens if the articles of impeachment are filed in the House, in House Judiciary, they're voted to the floor of the House votes them up to the Senate by a simple majority. We know we can do that. We have the votes. We're way over the numbers. And then it goes to the Senate and he's acquitted. Well, like, here's the news. Like anything else, like you go to trial on a murder count and you get acquitted, that doesn't mean that you're not then later going to be indicted for robbery if there's a separate set of facts that supports a robbery indictment. So there's not just one bite at the apple here. That's the first thing that I want to make really clear. But as we talked about on the broadcast earlier this week, there's also very significant strategic considerations here, given that impeachment is political as well as legal. Some of those considerations are as follows. What's the easiest case to make to get Republicans to vote in favor of impeachment? What's the easiest case to make sure that the general public understands why we're doing it? What's the easiest case to make that is going to get us the biggest political points possible in the event that the Republicans opt not to remove him? So there's layers here of political strategic considerations in addition to what the law allows. And, it seems very plain to me that the House Democrats are deep in decision-making right now and strategizing about what the next best course forward is. So, here's the thing. As I have said repeatedly, and I want to make this really clear, as long as he is impeached in the House, I don't see a negative outcome for any of us. Even in the meaning politically, because obviously there's a very adverse impact to all the marginalized communities that Trump is harming, to the lives that have been lost and will be lost if he remains in office in the event that he is acquitted in the front of the Senate. For purely political considerations from the left-leaning side of the fence, though, hypothetically, the worst case scenario, there's a small universe of articles of impeachment that are voted up. It goes to trial on the floor of the Senate. All the Republicans have to stand up and say they think that the destruction of American democracy is fine. The 2020 election will be a landslide. Because by the way, the most recent polls, there was one this morning, show that there is 60% of the country right now that wants to see him removed. It doesn't mean we don't have to get out the vote. It doesn't mean we don't have to keep organizing. It doesn't mean we don't have to keep registering people. But all that said, if that's the worst case scenario, it's not terrible from a political sense. However, and this is kind of where I am this morning on this. And this is the moment to talk kind of about the press spray that happened on the lawn this morning, because yesterday there was an absolutely horrific event that we talked about yesterday where he literally was confessing to crimes on the White House lawn. Okay. And it was actually committing crimes on the White House lawn. This morning, he spent 24 minutes lying, gaslighting, deluding, creating facts out of thin air, claiming this universal right to investigate corruption, which does not exist. And from the standpoint of where we find ourselves right now and what it takes to even just watch this, it's absolutely apparent, and I apologize to the psychologists and the psychiatric professionals who watch here, that he's absolutely barking mad. There's just no other way to put it. I can't watch him now without getting nauseous. And part of that is because he's actually speaking sentences that literally make no sense. Part of it is because he's gaslighting relentlessly. Part of it is because he's lying and absolutely misstating the law. Part of it is because the press is not holding his feet to the fire on any of it. And the key point of where we find ourselves right now is that I have the sense, and I'm not alone in this, that we're on the brink of the damage that he is doing to our international relationships, to the democracy that we live in as a whole, to the political process, to the Constitution, to the backstops of the three branches of government and the separation of powers that may be irreparable. And so my real concern right now, notwithstanding that I understand why Schiff and Pelosi want to appear to be so stable, and they want to appear to be doing this at the right pace, and they want to have the ducks lined up, and they want to take testimony and all this other stuff. If there's no pushback on this, it doesn't just stop, it gets worse. And, there is enough evidence right now. Any lawyer who has half a brain will tell you this. There is enough evidence right now to file articles of impeachment today. There was enough evidence to file articles of impeachment yesterday. He's on tape. He committed crimes on the White House lawn yesterday on national television. And now we know that he's done it all the way back to June with China. Yesterday it was just like calling on China to investigate. Now we know he's actually done it with a quid pro quo going all the way back to June. So my fear right now is that the longer this drags on, the more of a platform he's given, the longer they're given to come up with their gaslighting strategy, their 1984 strategy of how they're going to try to convince the American public that he's done nothing wrong and that the law doesn't matter, the harder it's going to be to keep the momentum propelling forward from the standpoint of the Republican Party getting on board. So there's just a huge need right now. And it's not just a legal need. And it's not just a political need. It's actually, from the standpoint of the Democrats, a messaging need to file the articles of impeachment to keep the momentum up. One of the things they teach you, by the way, when you're a lawyer and you're sort of starting out and you're involved in really high profile, big stakes litigation, is that depending on the side that you're on, you actually often want to push things very fast. I happened to start my legal career with a guy who was intent on pushing the boundaries of the law in all the best ways, on human rights law, on corruption, on antitrust and securities fraud and everything. And he trained me, as a part of this firm that I worked in that was very small, but very, in court every day, very sharp, that one of the things that you have to understand is that you can't keep people back on their heels if you let up the pressure. And so when you're in a place where you really want to force people to capitulate, you want to force them to make a mistake, you want to force people to come to the table and do the right thing, you have to keep marching forward. And that doesn't mean waiting for people to show up to testify. It doesn't mean issuing one more subpoena. It means writing articles of impeachment when you have the evidence to support it, taking a vote in the House Judiciary and bringing it to the floor, calling everybody back, give everybody Yom Kippur off. I understand it's the Jewish high holidays. I'm not suggesting that we hold a vote on Yom Kippur, but for God's sake, democracy is crumbling in front of our eyes. The president's committing crimes on the White House lawn. He's lying. Every single breaking news story is worse. And this has been going on for months. It's absolutely critical right now that those articles of impeachment are forthcoming soon. And it's Friday. That's the other thing I want to say. We've got a whole weekend ahead of us of insane president if we don't actually take action right now to show him that none of this is welcome. And I'm just going to mention one other thing here. One of the really key things that's very clear about the way in which the Mueller report was handled and Bill Barr's ability to slow down that narrative and to actually stop the forward motion of what could have happened in the House as a result of that is that the president took that as a win. And the moment that he watched the Mueller investigation being devalued over and over again in the way that it was, he started doing this. So the more that we wait, the longer that we wait, the longer it takes for us to strategically move in the right direction, the more he's going to be engaged in the destruction of American democracy. We're on the brink of horrible things right now, and there's no other way to kind of frame it. And we've been in a space of horrible things, but right now we're talking about the total failure of our system of government. So it's time, you guys know I don't like to come on here and be depressing, but let me just say this, it's time. And, if one of you said, do we do sit down strikes in the offices now? And I'm going to tell you, I actually don't think that's the right strategy. I think the phone calls have to be coming hot and heavy, but I will tell you that my bet is that in the back halls of the Congress, in the back halls of Capitol Hill, there are conversations happening right now with the GOP about how they're going to get out of this. And, in some sense, the pressure needs to be levied. We need to keep the pressure up on Pelosi and Schiff and Nadler to do the right thing. We need to empower and support those who are already doing the right thing. And then we need to make sure that the GOP is backed into a corner and doesn't have a choice but to vote in favor of his removal. And that's going to happen by us empowering people on our own side of the fence. All right, we have a few other bits of breaking news overnight that are relevant. Rick Perry announced yesterday that he is resigning by November. We already know that Rick Perry was engaged in conversations with the president of Ukraine related to the same set of facts. Perry announced basically simultaneously at the time that he announced his resignation that he was going to cooperate with Congress. That's a sign of somebody who doesn't want to go to jail. So, as much as we can all crack our jokes about Rick Perry, my bet at this moment in time is that we need to have as many witnesses as possible come forward. And so, Perry's resignation, which follows hot on the heels of Volker's resignation. Volker was testifying yesterday, as I said at the top of the broadcast. We already know he's cooperating. More cooperation brings more evidence. The other thing that I just want to say that we found out about yesterday, which is significant, is that the president actually removed the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine because she was perceived to be getting in the way of his plan to leverage aid to Ukraine to get dirt on the Bidens. That also is an abuse of power. So, again, we're layers deep right now in impeachable offenses, just layers and layers and layers deep. Okay. One comment that I just want to make here about quid pro quo, because I was asked about this explicitly. There is not a need for quid pro quo to show a violation of the election regs, the election law, rather, that prohibits foreign interference in U.S. elections. You do not have to show a quid pro quo to be engaged in a felony. So quid pro quo is not necessary. That's the first thing that I want to say. But the other thing that's relevant here, because of the way the question was asked, I want to make this really clear. You do not even have to have engaged in illegal activity to be impeached. Now, we have stacks now of evidence of quid pro quo, actual crimes in real time over the last several months, better evidence than you could ask for as a trial attorney in the same circumstances. But you don't actually need that. And this is one of the other things that I think needs to be made clear kind of in the public domain about impeachment. As long as the president has shown himself to be unfit for office, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors is the way that it's written in the Constitution. Other high crimes and misdemeanors are not defined. And, I'll remind you all that one of the articles of impeachment for Richard Nixon, as we talked about earlier on the broadcast this week, was him supplanting his judgment for that of the Congress in terms of the evidence that was relevant to be turned over. That's not a crime, right? It's not, I guess it's arguably an abuse of power, but he's not violated a section of the US Code. He didn't violate a section of the US Code when he did that, but he engaged in behavior that plainly made him unfit for office. It was against the constitutional standards for the way our government is supposed to work. So this idea that there are some arbitrary boxes that have to be checked in order for the president to be impeached is bullshit, frankly. And I just want to say this. The evidence at this point in time is overwhelming. Nixon's impeachment, the set of facts that went along with that look right now like a fucking birthday party. And, I've been trying so hard not to swear lately, so I apologize for that. But, all that said, we're way over the line right now. We're so far over the line, we're on the other side of the planet. There's no reason to wait. There's just no reason to wait. One of you is asking a question right now about why wouldn't a sit-down strike in Nancy Pelosi's office work? Well, I'm just going to make this really plain to you. I think at this point, Nancy Pelosi understands how grave the situation is. I don't know that anyone could see what happened yesterday on the White House lawn, let alone hear the testimony from Volker yesterday, let alone read these text messages that came out last night and not understand that the president has sold off American democracy for his own political aims. It kind of doesn't get any more obvious than this. So doing a sit-down strike in Nancy Pelosi's office is not going to force her to file articles of impeachment. What may force her to file articles of impeachment is urgency, right? And that's why, here's the other thing. You want to get on a plane and fly to Nancy Pelosi's office and go sit down and not leave? I'm not going to say don't do that. You're going to be arrested. That's fine. But, many people have been in the course of what's happened over the last 3 years. But, what I will say is this. It's the weight of public pressure that is manifest in contact with her offices and with others that is actually going to make some form of a difference here. It's not going to be masses of us in the street in Washington, D.C. at this point. It's not. And, the other thing that I will just say here is that, the thing I want to let you all know of, just in terms of my experience practicing law in Washington, D.C., as I did for 4.5 years in very high profile cases that had big components related to the Hill, and my own experience being on the Hill, is that there's a lot of conversations that are happening right now behind the scenes that we know nothing about. And, Nancy, for all the criticism that I've given her, is my bet is trying to figure out a way right now to get the GOP on board. So, the way we handle that is to keep up the pressure on her in terms of calls, in terms of contact, and everything else. I want to remind you all as well that what I said yesterday really goes. Anything that you can do right now to undermine the GOP talking points on this, the Republican narrative, the gaslighting and the lies, makes a huge difference. Even if you're only impacting like 5 people on your own Twitter feed, it makes a difference because the impeachment polling numbers continue to rise, and they're rising fast, like 10 points in the last month. So we all have to do our part to keep pushing this forward, and I'll just say this, the other thing I just want to say about it is this, because we've already talked about the leaker on this broadcast. Whoever it is who's doing the leaking of these transcripts off the secret server knows what they're doing. And I will say for myself, and again, I know, I've been here doing this broadcast for almost 3 years now. You all who have been here for a while know this started out as me just talking to my friends. I have a very high tolerance for this stuff, notwithstanding the fact that I watch it every day. And part of it is because of my own background and my knowledge and, my experience in DC, my experience doing, high profile white collar cases. Let me just say this. The corruption that is breaking by the hour right now is for anyone to take. And I don't want to discount the fact that it's absolutely crazy making, and it's going to get worse before he's gone. Okay. Like this leaker is very clearly, strategically, periodically releasing incredibly damning information that is designed to have maximum impact. So our job right now, given that the dominoes are falling inside the executive branch, they are, in my opinion, falling inside the Congress, even if we are not watching it happen in real time. And the president is criming directly on the lawn of the White House. Our job is to support the people who are pushing it forward. And the way we do that is by making our voices heard. I'm going to say one other thing to a number of you out there, because I've heard from a lot of you today that you were having, and yesterday, that you're having like mass stress responses right now. Okay. I'm going to say this again to those of you who are like breaking out in hives or find yourself self-medicating or are not sleeping. Okay. This ride is very bumpy right now. It's bad. Okay. I'm getting nauseous watching him speak. Okay. You should do what you need to do right now to take care of yourself, because we've got a little ways to go here. Like, even if the articles of impeachment are filed today and there's a vote on Monday, then we're off to the Senate. And that doesn't even include every other domino that's going to fall on every other person inside this administration who's engaged in criminal activity. We have a long way to go. And getting Trump out of office would certainly give us all some relief. We've even got a ways to go until that. Like, even if the articles of impeachment were filed now, we have a ways to go until that's going to happen. I want to encourage all of you to take the breaks that you need to take. The other thing I just want to mention here, reminder, because I'm getting asked this question every single day right now. Mitch McConnell is not in charge of impeachment on the floor of the Senate. It's really important that everybody gets that through their head. He has already said he will bring it to the floor. Chief Justice Roberts is in charge of the trial. Chief Justice Roberts makes the decisions on evidence. Chief Justice Roberts decides what witnesses are called, and how the subpoenas are going to issue and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Like, he's the judge in the impeachment case. So there's a lot to worry right now. The thing we do not need to worry about is Mitch McConnell's following the process. Okay. So please do what you need to do today to take care of yourself. I am working out like an hour and a half every day right now, because it's literally like the only way that I can cope with what's going on. You should do what you need to do for yourself. All right. I will talk to all of you on Monday, regular time. Much love to all of you. Please just take a break this weekend, even if it's just for like 2 hours. Take a break. But please make your phone calls today, and I can guarantee you that between now and 10 o'clock tonight, we're in for it. All right? I wish I could say otherwise. I wish it was going to be a calm and cool and collected day. It's not. All right. Love you all. I'll talk to all of you on Monday. Bye.